Hi, my name is Darren, and I love talking about African affairs. Now, if someone asks me how do I characterize um, politics in Africa or generally democracy, I'll tell you one thing. Democracy or politics in Africa cannot exist without violence, largely. That's how I would describe politics on a continent. Because between 23rd of June to about 29th or even 30th, there's been violence spread across Africa, especially in countries that have been experiencing or going through an electoral process. If it's not rigging of elections, it is violent. There are people being beaten, or there are people being killed. Let's talk about Togo now. Togo recently had an election after a change in their constitution that saw President Faure remain in power, but this time not as a president, but as a prime minister. Because when he came in 2005, when he took over his father, he was a president. But eventually, they made a constitutional amendment that now brings a prime minister in place with powers just the same way you see the president was. The difference is that he is voted by parliament. So it's a parliamentary government, okay? And the problem here is that a prime minister who is then elected by the parliament has no term limits. And people say no, they went on the streets, they were not happy with these amendments. And guess what? Violence. They were beaten and some were killed. And this is why the bishops of Togo came out and condemned the violence against protesters and said there's no justification for people being beaten on the streets. People who are expressing themselves say, President Faure, we don't think that this was the right thing to do. But I mean, Parliament is the one that makes the laws, regardless of where the influence comes for them to endorse a certain amendment or law to pass. And when you see the same thing happened in Malawi, not that the constitution has changed, but it's just violence that has happened against protesters. Because I'm talking about protests here. So don't mistake me by saying that I actually said that there's a constitutional amendment in Malawi. No. So in Malawi, people went on the streets to protest. And guess what? Some guys who are not identified, no uniform, had batons, rubber sticks, or instruments to beat protesters. And guess who was just looking and doing nothing about it? It was the security forces who just looked at people being violated, their rights being violated on the streets. And this worried so many people, including the Human Rights Watch team in Malawi, who say, if this is happening in July, what do you think will happen in September when they get into the presidential elections? Because they think that these are some of the things that build up to that kind of habit that is likely to happen in Malawi. So there is fear that Malawi may have an election that is not free from violence. Or if people decided to go on the streets and they are not satisfied with what will come out, and I'm not saying that's what will come out, but we're saying if, in case that happens, is that people will actually face violence. Same thing that happened in Mozambique when people were dissatisfied with elections that came out and people decided to go on the streets. They were met with violence, rubber bullets. Others were killed, but police literally beat down people into, I wouldn't say senses, but they beat them into calmness, that there was no violence. So it looks like everywhere you look on the African continent, violence against protesters is the solution to a certain democratic right called security of people or safety of people. Somehow, there's always that way. Look at what happened in Kenya on 25th, 26th. Even before then, a week before, there were already protests against the brutality of police in Kenya. A young man was jailed and killed in the jail cell, and the compensation he gets is building for the parents a house. Another man selling masks was shot at close range. And the first thing that someone comes out to say says that in his defense is that he's not the one who shot, but the bullet came from somewhere else. But the pictures clearly point to a man who has clearly put someone at gunpoint and kills him. when even he was trying to run away. You've already scared a protester away, and you still go ahead and shoot him. That protest saw the one for last week, the one that was a 1-year anniversary, remembering the people who were killed in the protests of last year, about 60 of them. 9 still died. 9 of them in the last week's protest. And guess what? Now Kenya is trying to come up with an amendment bill that that stops people from protesting around infrastructure, government infrastructure like parliaments or even state house and other places. But you see, the feeling in the people is that the law is being made to stop people from protesting and making it kind of illegal to protest. That's the feeling from the ground. But let's see if that bill comes to life. What will it be about? Is it true that it will stop people from protesting, or it will ban people from protesting? In Uganda, there's a public order management act, where people are managed. In fact, for you to protest, you must alert the police. If they give you a go-ahead to protest, then you will. If they don't, you won't. You know what happened right before the elections of 2021? People were killed in town because they were protesting after they think that their candidate was actually arrested, and violence broke out. People died. Protests brought Sudan where it is today. War. Civil war. So when you look around, you think protests are such a bad idea. They are not a right of expression in many countries, like it happens to appear in constitutions in all these countries. You cannot go on the street to protest because you may die, you may lose your life. So if you ask me about a democratic right called protesting and expressing yourself on the African continent, you better think twice. People are in jail in Egypt. In Nigeria, people died. If you remember the protest of SARS, not only that, even last time they just had a protest, people died. That is how difficult it is to exercise your right of expressing yourself and protest on the African continent. So imagine what is going to happen in Tanzania when an election comes up, in Malawi when an election comes up. Because, Tanzania, they even didn't want people to protest. In the first place, last year, Amnesty Tanzania comes out and tells you that people were arrested who tried to protest against government. The people were arrested when they tried to express themselves like journalists. They couldn't speak out. That's what the report says, and I've made a video about it here before. So what do you think is going to happen today? Maybe by October, when they get into elections. My name is Darren. I don't know what you think about protests, but let me know in the comment section.